Welcome to NovaraLive. Coming up tonight, Keir Starmer has been accused of failing to combat antisemitism following a horrific knife attack on 2 Jewish men in North London. The US is planning further military action in Iran. Israel has detained over 100 activists from an aid flotilla off the coast of Crete. And Reform Scottish leader has been branded tone deaf for boasting about his yachts. That's yachts, plural. I'm Helena, aka No Justice MTG. And it is still ladies' night, but it's not Darlington in the Sea. It is Banseka, Kayembe. I'm joined with today. How are you doing, Banseka?
I just about made it. I was not in this seat like 3 minutes ago, but I got here. I beat rush hour and I made it.
I mean, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. Very much looking forward to it. As always, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. You can also listen to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And as always, make sure that you let us know what you think in the comments section down below. In the wake of a brutal stabbing attack on 2 Jewish men in North London on Monday, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has visited the area, but a warm welcome is not what he received when he arrived in Golders Green. If you couldn't make it out there, those protesters were chanting Keir Starmer Jewhammer. But why exactly is Starmer being blamed here? ITV spoke to one of the survivors of the stabbing, Shlomo Rand, who is recovering in hospital.
I definitely feel that the government has let us down.
Do you hold the government partly responsible for what's happened to you today?
Definitely. If the streets of London are not safe for Jewish people, then it's definitely the government who they are the ones able to take care of the problems, and they are not doing their job.
Some have pointed to ongoing pro-Palestinian marches as a source of anti-Semitic sentiment, with some members of the Jewish community calling for them to be banned. Joining them is the government's independent reviewer of counter-terror legislation, Jonathan Hall, who has appeared on Channel 4 News.
They should use the laws they've got to get rid of anti-Semites. And if people are, for example, preaching in mosques, and we know that there are people preaching in mosques, it doesn't matter, frankly, whether it's based on the Quran or not, they should look to remove people, to deport people. They should make the straightforward argument that if you want to live in this country, you cannot be anti-Semitic. And they should use the many, many tools that are available to the government. I mean, I regret to say that I think that the amount of Iran-type language, death to the IDF, globalize the intifada that we've seen on the streets, is now at such a pitch, and it has painted a target on the backs of Jews and Israelis living here. And so if the government was to be really creative and they were prepared to take risky and unpopular moves, they might, for example, say, when you've got a national emergency with repeated attacks on Jews, on Brits, let's be honest, on Brits, then there should be perhaps even a moratorium on marches while those same slogans keep on being repeated day after day.
That was Hall calling for a moratorium on pro-Palestine marches amid what he called a national emergency involving repeated attacks on Jews. In comments to Times Radio, Hall also said this: "It's clearly impossible at the moment for any of these pro-Palestine marches not to incubate within them some sort of anti-Semitic or demonizing language." Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood was also asked on the BBC whether she agrees.
Do you agree with him about marches? What are you going to do about it? And is this a national emergency?
Well, firstly, let me say that actually yesterday the Crime and Policing Bill became an Act of Parliament. So we have now passed laws that do respond to the unique pressures of repeat protests. I made those announcements after the attack on Heaton Park Synagogue last year. We have now passed those laws that will give the police greater powers to deal with the cumulative impact of repeat protests and the unique pressure that they place upon communities. The police will now be able to place greater conditions on those protests and to be able to move them in terms of their location so that they're not disrupting worshippers in particular, not preventing people from being able to go to their synagogues in order to pray.
Mahmood was also asked about Hall's claim that there is a national emergency around anti-Semitism.
Well, I think the phrase national emergency has particular connotations.
That's
it
why
means
I
that
asked the question.
yes, and it means that for a period you change your democracy and you disapply some elements of our democratic
And
society.
this is not that.
I don't believe this is where we are today, but for me, this is an absolutely pressing priority. It is an emergency for me as Home Secretary to respond to, because we have seen a spate of attacks, and I know we need to do more in order to secure the safety of our Jewish community.
This afternoon, Keir Starmer addressed the nation following his visit to Golders Green, pledging to do more to tackle anti-Semitic violence, including more funding for Jewish security services and stronger powers to shut down charities that promote anti-Semitic extremism. But he also said this.
Take the marches that happen regularly across Britain. Of course, we protect freedom of speech and peaceful protest in this country. But if you are marching with people wearing pictures of paragliders without calling it out, you are venerating the murder of Jews. If you stand alongside people who say globalize the Intifada, you are calling for terrorism against Jews. And people who use that phrase should be prosecuted. It is racism, extreme racism. And it has left a minority community in this country scared, intimidated, wondering if they belong.
Now, Banseka, there's obviously a couple of things to discuss from what we've just seen there. So first of all, when it comes to potential curtailment of recent protest, I'm actually of the opinion, personally, I do think that the state obviously shouldn't be getting involved, but I think that maybe there's a pretty large case for, at the time of this kind of tension, people who want to go on pro-Palestinian marches should probably find at least some amount of a time before they do the next one, just to try and ensure that there's some way in which we can make the tensions lower, even if it's, obviously, as I said, don't believe that the state should be getting involved. But when it comes to the phraseology that you talked about there, when it came to globalize the Intifada as being outwardly condemned as being calls for violence against Jews, and he thinks that the implication there is it should be illegal, what's your reaction to what he said there?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a ramping up, I think, really, isn't it, to start policing people's language in that particular way. Obviously, a lot of people who are pro-Palestine would say that globalize the Intifada does not de facto mean harm against Jewish people, but it's about struggle, and it's about being being pro kind of Palestinian struggle. I mean, I think that the slippages between all of these things they're just incredibly concerning. I think I'm really, really worried about the very predictable way in which, of course, like anti-Semitism becomes a weapon. And we've seen this a million times over, which I think is really kind of depressing, because ultimately, you know, I wish that it didn't feel as shocking as it did, but it does feel shocking every single time. You know, firstly, the fact that it's being used to quash completely legitimate protest altogether. I get your point as well about the sensitivities around it. I'm not saying that, you know, we shouldn't be conscious of community cohesion. You know, that's something that we should all care about. And community cohesion goes a number of ways, doesn't it? It can't just be one way or the other way. So I totally take that on board. But I am extremely worried about the ways in which this is slipping very, very fast into some of the clips that you've just shown there about how to essentially quash down pro-Palestinian sentiment about something that is materially extremely real. You know, the genocide in Gaza, of course, is also extremely real. The, you know, extreme settler behavior that we've seen on the West Bank, very, very real. And this kind of, it's us or them. You know, you have to choose between the safety of Jewish people or pro-Palestinian struggle and being pro-Palestinian. It's really, really concerning and really, really worrying. And it's difficult to see a way out of this almost, because we've kind of got to this level almost in a way, in some respects, precisely because these slippages keep happening. And then we get to a point where we've got more visceral violence against a wide variety of different groups of people from different ethno-religious backgrounds. And then that's continuing to then give them more license to continue these slippages and continue these overlaps and get us to a more and more extreme place where we're policing people's language more. We're coming down heavier, more on pro-Palestinian sentiment. And it just feels like a kind of never-ending cycle. I'm all for community cohesion and for there being respect, I think, for what's going on and for people listening to one another and taking on board each other's harms. But I am also really, really worried about what feels like an incredibly slippery slope right now.
Yeah, look, the other thing as well is that immediately, without any knowledge of motive yet, we don't know what's happened with regards to motive, and they've immediately pulled this all into Israel-Palestine. And I'm just like, this is the problem. We need to have this very deliberate and specific demarcation of criticism of Israeli policy, criticism of the ideological predilections of Zionism and whatever, anti-Zionism, whatever anyone wants to talk about. Whenever anyone wants to discuss these things in ideological terms, has to be demarcated very specifically from the international Jewish community, especially the British community of Jews at the moment that we have currently in terms of the real pain that this community is feeling. It cannot be used to immediately then go, well, this is in the realm of discussion of what's happening in the Middle East. And I'm just like, well, it could be potential that this person did engage in this because of what is happening in the Middle East. We do not know this yet. Yeah. And the immediate reaction for everybody is to drag it all into Israel-Palestine again, rather than talking about like the actual steps we can take right now to discuss, as you say, community cohesion and how we can get over the actual anti-Semitism that we're seeing. It's been ramped up, obviously, not just in terms of the attacks that we've seen. Obviously, there was the Heaton Park synagogue attack. We've seen people who had their attacks foiled. We've seen this latest stabbing. But we've also seen lots of rhetoric. We've seen rhetoric online. We've seen a heightening up of this rhetoric in comment sections on all manner of social media posts around issues like this. And whether or not people have certain opinions of what's happening in the Middle East, we really need to be able to find a way of tackling this without stifling freedom of speech.
Yeah. And it's also one thing that I was thinking about a lot as well with regards to anti-racist movements in this country, is also thinking about the ways in which there's so much out there that is kind of pushing emotionally people's buttons to try and divide us. There's so much out there in terms of, because so much anti-Semitism gets misused by malicious political actors, there's so much there that is then gearing up people who have genuine anti-racist views to get fed up and to want to almost disassociate themselves maybe from some of these causes that we know are all interlinked. And I think as someone who cares a lot about anti-racism and anti-racist movements, I think it's incumbent on us as much as possible to try and think beyond these highly constructed divides that these politicians, again, very much for their own benefit, because they think that's what will be good for them personally. It's incumbent on us to do that actually very emotional and quite difficult work, I think, of overriding these very real feelings of frustration, anger that lots of people in lots of different directions feel, and find those common threads of solidarity, find those things that bring us together. You know, I was, not to make this about me whatsoever, but I was racially abused in the street the other day for the first time in a really long time. And, you know, so when I see stories like this about these anti-Semitic attacks in North London, not only do I think that's absolutely terrible for the Jewish community, I know that's also bad news for me. You know, there's a shared interest there that we all have in that kind of safety and security. And we need to find a way, I think, within wider British anti-racist movements to make sure that we're not losing sight of the fact that very basic point that all these oppressions are actually deeply, deeply interlinked, and that there is no defeating of Islamophobia without defeating anti-Semitism and vice versa. It's all interlinked. It all feeds in together. One begets the other.
100% agree. Now, further details around the man alleged to have carried out what is being treated as a terrorist attack in Golders Green have emerged. The man is said to be a 45-year-old Somalia-born UK citizen, with Met Commissioner Mark Rowley describing him as having a history of violence and mental illness. But he also has a history of contact with Britain's counter-terror mechanisms too. According to police, the attack suspect was referred to the Prevent Counter-Extremism scheme in 2020. His case, The Guardian has discovered, was closed after just 6 weeks. The Prevent scheme is incredibly controversial, not least of all because of what it's usually only in the press when someone accused of carrying out an extremist attack is discovered to have been referred to it. The scheme's intrusive techniques have been labelled as discriminatory by the UN, which accused Prevent of disproportionately targeting Muslims and violating their rights. In 2023, the Shawcross Review found that the scheme wasn't fit for purpose and was being forced to bear the weight of poor mental health services. He also pushed for Prevent to focus more on non-violent Islamist extremism. But the review itself was also heavily criticised, with the government urged to reject it after accusations that author William Shawcross's findings were ideologically driven. It's very hard to tell whether Prevent actually does stop radicalisation. Alumni of the programme include Usman Khan, who fatally stabbed 2 people at London Bridge, Jake Davison, who gunned down 5 people in Plymouth, and of course Axel Rudakabana, who killed 3 young girls and injured a number of them in the very famous attacks in Southport, the very infamous ones. Indeed, Banseka, given what we've seen in terms of the history of Prevent up until now, and we find yet again somebody who's gone on to commit an act of violence had previously been referred and their case has been closed, what does it tell us about the suitability of this programme?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly suggests that it's not particularly working. I mean, it's interesting because there's kind of 2 sides to this. On the one hand, what you've brought up suggests that there are dangerous people being picked up by Prevent. So they are picking up people who have the capacity to go out and do dangerous things that put members of the public in danger. But there is perhaps not enough repercussions. There's not enough in terms of actually resolving the reasons as to why, how they've ended up in that state of mind where they have a propensity towards violence. And then there's the other side of the coin, which I suppose is the one which we probably hear maybe a bit more about, how Prevent actually scoops in a lot of people who shouldn't be scooped in, and as well. You know, something like 9 out of 10 Prevent referrals in 2017 to 2018 didn't require any de-radicalisation action at all, apparently. So, which again, 90% of people you're bringing in, I imagine that's quite a traumatic, emotionally difficult thing to go through if you're being kind of looped into this this kind of pool of so-called extremist people, or kind of pre-extremist people. We know that studies as well have shown that Muslim students, for example, have changed their behaviour for fear of being stigmatised. So they're trying to almost like de-Muslify or de-Islamicize themselves, which is, terrible. Again, very analogous to the ways in which we're talking about Jewish people not being able to be openly Jewish now in certain areas. We can also see that there are ways in which Muslim people also feel the need to perhaps hide their own religious background as well. So it's interesting that there's kind of, I'm not sure what gets to the heart of this, what these 2 sides of the story, lots of people being scooped in by Prevent young people who clearly shouldn't be, and it's having a bad impact on them and the way that they feel about their identity, and they're being stigmatized. And then you've also got people legitimately brought in who, on the other hand, are just not actually being tackled and being de-radicalized. So there's clearly something in the methodology there about Prevent that is not actually able to even de-radicalize even the few perhaps radical people that they pick up.
Yeah, it does seem to be that the system just isn't functioning in the way that, maybe even that it was intended to do so in the first place. And that whilst we've had certain reviews, they've been challenged too. And it seems difficult to find a way of being able to reform this process from the ground up without people from each side of whatever debate is happening getting involved, as we saw, to change what was an actual review that was taken and now is being, what it seems to be mostly discarded in terms of its recommendations for how to change the scheme. Now, the anti-Semitic attacks in Golders Green have rightly received a lot of attention over the last 36 hours. But over the same period, there have been other indications that political violence in Britain more generally is a growing problem. In 2023, 19-year-old Alfie Coleman was arrested in a sting operation after MI5 agents pretending to be online arms dealers caught the teenager as he tried to buy a Makarov semi-automatic pistol, 5 magazines and 200 rounds of ammunition. He'd already agreed to pay £3,500 for the weapon, money he'd saved from his part-time job at a supermarket. Coleman, now 21, has been found guilty of preparing acts of terrorism after a jury heard he had been planning a mass shooting attack. Some of the details of the trial are incredibly disturbing. Prosecutors said Coleman held an extreme right-wing ideology and that he idolised Adolf Hitler and Thomas Mehr, who murdered the MP Joe Cox in a gun and knife attack in 2016. His diary has recorded the names and number plates of people who upset him, including colleagues and shoppers who he called race traitors for having partners who were not white. They also contained his plans to carry out a terrorist attack, as well as his own manifesto. Amongst his targets were London Mayor Sadiq Khan, and previously Coleman had pled guilty to charges of attempting to possess a prohibited firearm and ammunition, and 10 counts of possession of material likely to be useful to a person committing or preparing an act of terrorism. Those included documents like White Resistance Manual, the Terrorist Explosives Handbook, and 21 Techniques of Silent Killing. In other chats with undercover agents, Coleman had agreed to buy a Scorpion submachine gun, an AK-47, and ammunition in northern France. He didn't go through with the plan then, but did research the location of several mosques in the area. Coleman was not known to Prevent, even though his interests in right-wing ideology dated back to at least when he was 14. Now, Banseka, of course, these are allegations from, well, convictions indeed, going back to quite a number of years. But in the media, of course, we have seen some coverage, maybe not all, of a lot of right-wing extremism there when we saw there was a firebomb attack on a refugee processing centre. I believe that was in 2023. There's also been recently seen there was an LGBTQ plus nightclub that was burnt down just recently
On
in
Sunday.
Milton Keynes.
Yeah.
Yep. We've seen a stabbing attack against an Iranian man just recently, as well. Of course, there was a ramming incident against a hijabi Muslim. And there was also a firebomb attack against a mosque as well. It seems like we're continually seeing a radical increase in the amount of targeted hate crimes and terrorist attacks against multiple different minorities in this country. First of all, what do you think is driving this? And what do you make of the different levels of media coverage for these different things?
Yeah, I mean, it's very apparent, even you just listing a lot of those out, by the way, that there's loads there where I'm like, oh, I've only vaguely heard of those, you know? So, of course, that there's this competition that's been kind of created in our kind of media attention economy of what, you know, crimes get, one, reported much at all, and two, what get that label of terrorism, right? It's interesting as well, pulling this back into some of the pro-Palestine stuff as well, and thinking about the prescription of Palestine action and that activity being regarded as a terrorism, and then the flip side of what gets labelled terrorism and what doesn't. I certainly think that there's been a noticeable rise of kind of far right and radical right terrorism acts, which I think is extremely worrying. I do think within sort of our policing system, there is a kind of bias, I think, in terms of framing and understanding acts of terrorism through the prism of so kind of radical Islam and radical Islamist activity, whereby right-wing activity is not viewed perhaps in quite the same way. We know as well that the media can sometimes be a bit more generous, I think, in the framing as well of kind of lone, does seem to be lone right-wing terrorists as opposed to always a faction, but sometimes it's a faction of people as well. And that there's a kind of painting of them as being somebody with mental health issues, problems like that, which I think is true, by the way, of probably most people who commit terrorist acts. They probably all have deep issues with their own kind of self-esteem, mental illness issues, etc. And that's something we could probably say happens across the board. I know that's something that came up. The police highlighted that with this individual who's done this latest attack in Golders Green. So it does feel like there's a bit of a vacuum, I think, in terms of who gets to be framed as a terrorist or not. And I think even the use of the word terrorism, it is itself a very political thing, I think. And yeah, kind of who gets to be called it, who doesn't, has a real impact, I think, on ultimately drips down to not just power holders, the police, our politicians. They kind of set the tone for all that, and it drips down into the wider public in terms of what gets to be taken essentially as seriously. And as I said, it all again goes back to solidarity, right? If we're only going to take certain things seriously but not others, that insecurity will bleed out elsewhere. I think it bears repeating that anti-Semitism is also a radical right-wing idea or a far-right idea. We do live in a climate where I think, again, anti-Semitism has been pushed to be very much the purveyor of people on the left, but anti-Semitism on the right, including the extreme fringes where it can be really dangerous, is not being taken seriously. So I do worry if we put this back into the context of what's happened this week, if there's a right-wing attack on Jewish people, we need to make sure we take that just as seriously, whether it's right-wing coded, left-wing coded, or whatever. So, I'm rambling a bit now, but I've gone off on so many tangents. My brain was firing off there.
That's the thing, is that we even saw newscasters, people on Sky News, essentially saying, well, we saw the rise in anti-Semitism because of Jeremy Corbyn. And I'm just like, anti-Semitism has always been a problem in this country.
Absolutely.
It's continually been a problem for
very
a very
long
long
history.
time.
It's the prototype racism in this country. It's anti-Semitism. Absolutely.
Absolutely, 100%. The idea, first of all, that Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite, I would obviously reject that personally. But the idea that somehow 2015 was when the anti-Semitism started, this is totally asinine reporting in my opinion. But when it comes to the level to which there's a response and coverage, so for example, if we just compare the attack on the LGBTQ plus nightclub just recently, I would regard that as a terror attack. It was a nightclub full of people. Luckily, everyone managed to escape before the fire spread enough to trap people. It was a deliberate, what it looks like, arson attack on this venue. I would describe that as being, there's certainly a hate crime, but potential terrorism given the political nature of attacks on queer people. But the problem is, of course, has there been a big media circus about it? No. Has there been an emergency Cobra meeting? No. Has the Prime Minister talked about it? Has even the Health Secretary talked about it? No. There's been no discussion of this in the mainstream media. And this is because, quite rightly, the media takes anti-Semitism incredibly seriously, as everybody should. And these kind of responses that we're seeing are warranted, obviously. But when it comes to stuff like queerphobia, the press don't oppose it. They actively fan the flames. They actively engage in it themselves. So to take this kind of media response that we'd seen correctly in terms of what we've seen in Golders Green to the kind of attacks on the queer community, they would not be able to do that because they would have to hold themselves accountable.
Yeah. And, as I said, I'll just reiterate as well, I think the media takes some kinds of anti-Semitism seriously, right? I don't think it's carte blanche, which again, that there is a kind of hierarchy of anti-Semitism, right? Like, what's the anti-Semitism we care about? Again, it becomes a political weapon. It's about, well, who can we weaponize, this against? Which is awful. Like, that's actually terrible for the Jewish community, because what happens when one day the day comes where that's no longer a viable or useful weapon for power holders? They're going to just drop the Jewish community and just not even have that pretense anymore. So to kind of use anti-Semitism in that way, have this hierarchy of anti-Semitism where, when it's extreme or radical right-wing anti-Semitism, I even think about some of the historical allegations that came out about Nigel Farage recently that I thought were quite compelling, about a former classmate of his, Jewish classmate, who said that he said some awful things, hissing, mimicking gas chambers, for example, to harass this Jewish classmate. And, that was covered by the media, but, kind of just came off Nigel Farage's back. It never really became a sticking point. And so again, it's what gets taken seriously and what doesn't in terms of anti-Semitism. There's a real hierarchy there that, again, is dangerous for Jewish people, because if you don't face the right kind of anti-Semitism, the media doesn't care and politicians don't care. And that's really, really bad.
That's true. I think I agree with Zach Polanski that I think that what people say when they were a kid, I think there should be a level of, demarcation there. People do change over time. But then again, we were also seeing anti-Semitism in Reform UK members. There's polling showing that 25% of Reform UK voters said that they would be...
I saw that.
That was the specific phraseology. Well, Jewish people chase money. Chase money, I think was what the polling said from YouGov. And there's been no discussion around that, or indeed many people on the right of politics who've used phrases like cultural Marxism, a historic anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. There's been, I guess, there was some coverage when Suella Braverman used the term and people did come out against it, but it's never been used as a weapon to attack.
It's not stuck on her. No one now refers to her as an anti-Semite in the way they would with the likes of Jeremy Corbyn, for example.
Exactly 100%. And I don't think Suella Braverman is anti-Semitic at all. I mean, she's married to a Jewish man, but it's understanding where those tropes come from and how those things get unlearned and how we talk about the language that's used, I think is what's really important here. With the peace talks having stalled between Tehran and Washington, the world did not have high hopes for a peaceful resolution to the US-Israeli war in Iran. But there was at least a little hope that the talks could be rescued. Hopes, however, are set to be dashed, as the Trump admin are reportedly pondering the use of ground troops to open up the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping, among other options such as more aerial bombardment of Iranian infrastructure that have been discussed. The sticking point in current negotiations is that of the two countries' parallel blockades of the shipping choke point. Trump's desire to be seen as the victor in terms of relitigating the JCPOA that he tore up himself means the US is requesting unacceptable concessions from Tehran, which conversely means the IRGC are unwilling to allow Western shipping through the strait either for as long as Trump maintains his own blockade. In response to reporting of America's plans, however, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei was defiant in a speech read out on Iranian state TV. The Guardian reports this. The statement said Tehran would secure the Gulf region and eliminate what he described as the enemy's abuses of the waterway, and that new management of the strait will bring comfort and progress for the benefit of all the nations of the region, and economic blessings will bring joy to the hearts of the people. Foreigners who maliciously covet it, that is the strait, from thousands of kilometers away, have no place there except at the bottom of its waters. Strong words. And this latest round of saber rattling has caused yet more disturbance in the troubled petrochemical markets. In the wake of the impasse between Washington and Tehran, the price of Brent crude surged past $120 a barrel, with economists predicting a potential global recession should the current status quo be maintained any further, which increasingly appears to be more likely by the day. Here at home, the effects have yet to be felt, but jet fuel shortages and inflationary effects are just around the corner, to which Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey warned risks a high likelihood of future rate hikes, even if today's announcement from the Monetary Policy Committee kept rates steady at 3.75% for now. Previous to the illegal US-Israeli assault on Iran, UK consumers were expecting further rate cuts, having weathered a bruising few years of persistent cost-push inflation on top of the negative effects of Liz Truss's ill-fated fiscal event that catapulted rates and gilt yields. This latest news will nix any hope of a sunnier economic outlook, with another cost of living crisis predicted to hit after most of us at home haven't yet gotten out of the other side of the current one. Although whilst Brits can look forward to an inflationary shock, Americans are already feeling the pinch, and not just with rising prices either. They're also watching their own government incinerate billions of public money pursuing their belligerent escapades in the Middle East, with Pentagon officials estimating the cost so far at $25 billion. US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth had to face the wrath of angry legislators representing their equally angry constituents during the House Armed Services Committee hearings yesterday, and they didn't go very well. First up, Congressman Ro Khanna quizzed him on the war costs of irregular American. Fuck. You go back to the start of the previous US Defense Sec. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth had to face the wrath of angry legislators representing their equally angry constituents during the House Armed Services Committee hearings yesterday, and things didn't go very well. First up, Congressman Ro Khanna quizzed him on the war's costs for regular Americans.
How much did it cost American taxpayers in terms of the strike to the Iranian school where kids were killed? Do you have that number in terms of the missiles we used?
As I've said, that unfortunate situation remains under investigation.
You don't know how much it costs the taxpayer?
But I wouldn't tie a cost to anything.
It's a reasonable question, no, sir? I mean, our taxpayer money was going there. Do you know how much it will cost Americans in terms of their increased cost in gas and food over the next year because of the Iran war?
I would simply ask you what the cost is of an Iranian nuclear bomb.
I'm going to give you that opportunity.
I would simply ask you what the... you're playing gotcha questions about domestic things. I'm not...
You're saying it's a gotcha question to ask what it's going to be in terms of the increased cost of gas.
Why won't you answer what it costs to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb?
I give you that, sir, but let me...
What would it cost? What would you pay to ensure Iran doesn't get a nuclear bomb? What would you pay?
I reclaim my time. Do you not know? You had no one do the analysis of what the increased cost of gas and food on the American people are going to be?
What is the cost of Iran holding that straight at issue with nuclear weapons?
It's $631 billion, which means it's an increase of $5,000 a year for American households. Now, let me give you this point. You're saying that your operation is preventing a nuclear Iran. Will you acknowledge that there is an economic cost to the American people for doing what you believe is necessary to make Iran denuclear? Will you acknowledge the economic cost?
We have an incredible economic team that's managing this better than what the previous administration did to our economy, what the previous administration did with inflation,
you know what's upsetting?
I reclaim my time. COVID, and you're going to lecture this administration about the economy?
You know what is upsetting?
Incredible.
You didn't even do the analysis on how much it's costing the American people. It's one thing if you said, okay, it costs the American people $5,000, but we think it's worth it. That's what we've done in World War II and other wars. Here's what it costs. You got to pay for it. You don't even know what the average American is paying. You don't know what we paid in terms of the missiles that hit the Iranian school. You don't know what we're paying in terms of gas. You don't know what we're paying in terms of food. Your 25 billion number is totally off. It's the incompetence.
It is very funny to me with the line here being, what's the cost that's necessary to prevent Iran gaining a nuclear weapon? I'm just like, well, clearly, Iran is obviously justified in wanting one, given the fact that you've continually invaded. Not that they were having one to begin with, as the previous Ayatollah that's now been assassinated had a fatwa against them. That the threat of Iran becoming nuclear didn't exist until you killed the guy who had the fatwa. And that is the whole reason why we're all doing this, and it's the reason why Americans are facing significantly higher costs. I don't think that it's very easy to make the argument for the average American that the extra $5,000 a year that they are going to have to pay for a thing that they didn't have to do in the first place is justifiable. Now, this was followed by scrutiny of how this dovetailed into Trump's campaign promises. This question was asked by Congressman Eugene Vindman.
And so I just want to kind of give you the state of play right now. It's been 2 months of war. We have hopes for a resolution, but the war continues, really. Iran has closed the strait, and we've now gone in and blockaded their ports. 1/5 of the world's oil is unable to transit the strait, and the American people and the department are paying significantly more. And you also said that this is what the American people actually voted for. But actually, the American people voted for a promise not to get into Middle Eastern wars. And they voted for lower prices. And this is the exact opposite of what they got. So let me ask you this. The president ordered the strike. Is that correct?
The president's been saying for over 30 years that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. So he's been
got
very
it.
clear as a
We're
position.
talking
When
about
the American people voted for President Trump overwhelmingly, they voted
Secretary,
for that
I got
position.
that.
I think you'll find the biggest thing that people voted on in terms of exit polling at the election was the economy, the rising prices from the inflationary crisis that happened under the previous president. That was the most cited reason people voted for Donald Trump, not his desire to make sure that Iran weren't going to get a nuclear weapon that they didn't have anyway and that there was a fatwa against. I don't buy that argument from P. Hegseth at all. Banseka, though, I think that there's a bigger, a wider conversation about just how this is going to look for the average American voter, and certainly for the MAGA base of Donald Trump, who in probably lots of cases voted on no foreign wars and cheaper groceries and cheaper fuel prices. Doesn't seem to be a contract which they've kept their end of.
They do seem to be fantastically bad at this. I mean, the pool of people that this war supposedly benefits seems to be getting kind of smaller and smaller, shrinking and shrinking. You're completely right. People voted for Donald Trump largely on the basis that he'd reduced the price of eggs. You know, that cereal would be cheaper, not to go on with these kind of infinity wars in the Middle East. And they're not going very well, obviously, either. I think you had your colleague Dalia, was it last week or the week before, talking about how this is a phenomenally bad piece of imperialism. Like, these are people who actually just, they don't know how to do imperialism anymore. Like, you don't know how to do it because this isn't it, you know? Imperialism, generally speaking, is meant to benefit at least probably a little bit the population of people that you're supposedly doing this for. In reality, it always benefits the elites. Of course, that's what imperialism does. But if it's actively making the citizens, not just in the country you're trying to imperialize, but also your own country, much worse, I don't know how sustainable that is. You know, how do you keep that going? It's completely absurd.
I mean, to be fair, if we're to believe the New York Times, literally the only reason that they're here in the first place is because Donald Trump was wooed into doing so by Benjamin Netanyahu's incredibly high quality presentation, PowerPoint presentation about how he'd be the best president for doing the thing that no other president would do, despite the fact that other colleagues like Rubio and Vance told him, maybe this will cause problems, maybe they'll close the Strait of Hormuz, maybe that we shouldn't be getting into this, and he just did it anyway. So of course, he wasn't even thinking of the benefit to the American people because Donald Trump is concerned with one thing, and that's his own ego.
Absolutely. And there's just so many sort of tactical things about this. You know, this is completely different to the invasion of and genocide going on in Gaza, for example, which was a territory that for a very long time was kind of picked apart and dismantled over several decades, right? And that in part is what laid the groundwork to allow then post October 7th Israel to kind of dominate that territory further and enact its genocide. Iran is obviously a completely different territory, right? You know, its defenses and completely different position in terms of its allyship as well, completely different. It's not the same situation at all. The other thing I'll say quickly as well is this defense that they're jumping to about Iran has bombs, nuclear bomb, scary, rah. That's like their kind of main reflex with regards to, you know, any questions to do with the economy or any of these other things that others are rightly bringing up. I do wonder what the limit on that is. You know, in politics, I think we often think about how much can you keep campaigning negatively. You know, this really bad thing will happen if you do not support this. You know, this really awful thing will happen. We saw how that played out in, you know, very different situation, but Brexit, for example, in this country, like warning people that the economy would go, you know, down the pan. It didn't stop people voting for Brexit, you know. I think there's a real limitation on how much you can campaign negatively. Part of what people liked about Donald Trump, I think, in the run-up to the 2024 election was there was positives. There was a whole load of policies, boatload of policies, more policies than he probably ever was going to do. But there was a positivity to them. You know, there's obviously a negativity in the sense that, you know, a lot of them were about demonizing certain groups and things like that. I'm not trying to say that, you know, it was all lovely, but there was a positivity there. You know, make America great again is in of itself, of course, a positive slogan.
Bring down prices on day one.
I knew the Trump impression was
bring
going.
down prices day one. No foreign wars. We're going to have no tax on dips. There were policies. There were certainly things that he tried to offer the public.
He had policies for everything. Where Kamala Harris had zero policies and zero change whatsoever, he had policies for everything. And that kind of positivity, you know, is really gone now. And it's just very much like, if we don't do this, even more worse things will happen, even badder things will happen. I don't know for how long that's really going to be convincing to the American public.
And that's the thing, right, is that can work as a political strategy if times are good. Because if times are good, you can essentially say, don't screw things up by voting in the other guy or supporting the other part of this particular policy, right? Because things are okay at the moment and they might jeopardize that. When things are in the shitter, which they certainly are in the United States at the moment, you have to be on the change kind of ticket. And you can't really change much from what we've done already.
Yeah.
To be fair. That was the moment Israeli soldiers boarded a boat in the Mediterranean on Wednesday night, breaking up the latest convoy of ships headed to Gaza as part of the global summit Flotilla. Now, we've witnessed this before. Last October, the first convoy of the global summit Flotilla was intercepted by Israeli forces in international waters as it approached Gaza, with more than 470 people on board the ships detained by the military and kidnapped to prisons in Israel. But what happened last night isn't simply a rerun of what happened last year. That's because whilst this interception also happened in international waters, the boats were hundreds of miles away from Gaza. Of course, Israel is no stranger to flouting international law, whether it's Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, or Iran. The country has rarely met an international treaty or convention it hasn't immediately broken, and now it's apparently coming for maritime law. Earlier this month, 39 boats belonging to the Global Summit Flotilla departed from Barcelona en route to Gaza, where those on board would once again attempt to break Israel's siege of the enclave. More than 70 vessels were expected to take part, with other ships joining along the way. And over the last 3 weeks, the flotilla made good progress, departing Barcelona mid-April before reaching Sicily last week, where they docked for a short period. Earlier this week, they set sail once again, reaching the western side of Crete on Wednesday evening. And it's there that Israel intercepted some of those boats overnight. It began with bright searchlights and a warning.
Where the aid will undergo a security inspection and will subsequently be transferred to the Gaza Strip. You're required to change your course. Any further attempt to sail toward Gaza places your safety at risk and leaves the IDF no choice but to take all necessary measures at its disposal to enforce the lawful maritime security blockade.
Later, the attacks began, involving drones, speedboats, and at least one more ship.
We have a killer military vessel very, very close to us. They've turned their lights off and we are all sat in the cockpit with our hands up waiting for interception now.
Hi, we were currently halfway through a naval disruption mission and it appears that we have been interrupted with an interception from an unknown entity. We have had boats that have reported being surrounded by unknown vessels. We've had flares set off. We've had high drone activity. As a flotilla, we have activated all safety protocols and we are now preparing for interception. If we go silent, this is why. We have been intercepted. Please keep tracking us. Condemn Israel, condemn anyone that you can to bring us back home safely and keep an eye on us.
Novara Media's Charlotte England has reported on the interception, writing this. Of 57 boats at sea, 22 are believed to have been intercepted in the attack, which began at around 11 p.m. local time. 35 others escaped interception, with many sailing into Greek territorial waters. Around 170 participants are believed to have been detained and are likely being taken to Israel, several days' sail away. Others were left stranded at sea, their boats heavily damaged, unable to communicate with organisers or the Coast Guard, and in the path of an oncoming storm. In a statement, GSF described the situation as a calculated death trap. After smashing engines and destroying navigation arrays, the military retreated, intentionally leaving hundreds of civilians stranded on powerless, broken vessels, directly in the path of a massive approaching storm, the group said. One of those who escaped the interception is Jessie Aletta Van Schaik, who told TWT what happened.
So around 6 p.m. UTC, which is the time we use at sea, we started seeing many lights. It was exactly when the sky turned dark, and we are.
Yeah, I said, yeah. One of these who escaped. Yeah, TRT. One of those who escaped the interception is Jessie Aletta Van Schaik, who told TRT what happened.
So around 6 p.m. UTC, which is the time we use at sea, we started seeing many lights. It was exactly when the sky turned dark, and we are trained for it because we've been followed by drones now for the last few days. But usually the drones are just high up; they're only watching us but not doing much. But this time we saw many drones, and we also saw a military vessel at sea passing by us with very big flashlights. So we saw first a dark vessel approaching, then suddenly the lights went on. We saw drones going up in the sky, and then basically the rest of the night it was watching the whole sky and watching boats nearby. And yeah, I've never seen both so many stars and so many drones in my life, I think. And it was all the time looking like, is a light flickering? Is it a star? When it's moving, is it following us? And usually it was following us. So when the boat turned, the drones turned with us, basically. Yeah, it's completely ridiculous. Like, we're 600 nautical miles away from Gaza. We're between Italy and Greece. Every boat passed by here. And the fact that they, like, already international waters in general is ridiculous. But this is also 600 miles away. How dare they to do this? Like, every time they go further. It's not just one small attack, which would already be ridiculous, but they intercepted 22 boats, illegally kidnapped 22 boats with humanitarian aid on board. And the fact that the international community so far has been completely silent is both scandalous, but it doesn't surprise me at all. The international community has been silencing and has been disappointing and has been complicit for like the last 2 years. So I'm not surprised that they don't do anything right now. But I do demand that they do everything they can to stop this and to protect us from being attacked again.
After the interception, Israel's foreign ministry posted this. The driving force behind the flotilla provocation is Hamas, joining hands with professional provocateurs, with the aim of sabotaging President Trump's peace plan transition to its second phase and intended to divert attention from Hamas's refusal to disarm. Israel is committed to the freedom of navigation. Due to the large numbers of vessels participating in the flotilla and the risk of escalation, and the need to prevent the breach of a lawful blockade, an early action was required in accordance with international law. The operation was carried out in international waters peacefully and without any casualties. An initial inspection of the vessels revealed materials that appear to be drugs and contraceptives. This flotilla is another PR stunt without humanitarian aid. These are professional provocateurs on a pleasure cruise. A condom flotilla, nothing more, nothing less. Now, okay, bit weird that they're going to call it a condom flotilla, but nevertheless. Now, later, Israel's foreign minister Gideon Saar said this. So far, Israel, through the IDF, has successfully blocked attempts to breach the lawful naval blockade on Gaza and the arrival of vessels from the provocative flotilla, including last night. All participants in the provocative flotilla who were taken off the vessels were taken off unharmed. In coordination with the Greek government, the individuals transferred from the flotilla vessels to the Israeli vessel will be disembarked on a Greek beach in the coming hours. We thank the Greek government for its willingness to receive the flotilla participants. We call on anyone who is not interested in provocations but rather in humanitarian aid to Gaza to do so through the BOP, which also issued a statement on the matter today. Israel will not allow the breach of the lawful naval blockade on Gaza. If they're dropped off on a Greek beach in the coming hours, as Saar says, they will be, that means the flotilla participants, sailors in international waters, they will have been held by Israeli forces without warrant or reason for coming up for 24 hours. Now, Saar also referred to a statement from US President Donald Trump's Board of Peace there. This is part of what they said. The flotilla heading to Gaza is the performative love boat activism of people who know nothing of and care even less for the condition of Gazans. It is distasteful to trade on the misery of people to build your social media profiles. For those actually wanting to help Gaza, here is a suggestion. Use whatever influence you have to maintain the pressure on Hamas so they fulfill their obligations to pave the way forward for the communities they destroyed. If we'd like to contribute to the recovery, we welcome support through established humanitarian channels coordinated by the Board of Peace, the United Nations and the World Bank, so that your contributions reach those who deserve and need our aid. Now, Israel's interception of boats in the middle of the Mediterranean, hundreds of miles away from its territory, has shocked some. This was from UN Special Reporter Francesca Albanese. Alarm, how on earth it is possible that Israel is allowed to assault and seize vessels in international waters just off Greece/Europe. Besides, what you can think of apartheid Israel and its genocidal leaders, this should send shockwaves across Europe. Apartheid without borders. There's been some reaction from European leaders, but it's been fairly muted. Italy's Giorgia Meloni has condemned the interception and demanded the release of, quote, all the unlawfully detained Italians. She also called on Israel to show, quote, full respect of international law and guarantees on the physical safety of people on board. And the EU's foreign affairs spokesperson has issued a similar call. But most countries have said nothing at all. Nothing at all. Of course, just like they said nothing about the previous flotillas. Banseka, this is a step further than what we've seen before from Israel, but not to be surprising, if anything can be surprising for what Israel does nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, there's no there's no repercussions for anything they do. So why would they not, not to make the metaphor too exact, but push the boat out further? Why would they not allow themselves to encroach further into international waters and go even further than they have done with previous flotillas? There's zero consequences. You can do what you like when there's no other repercussions, right? Strikes me as kind of highly disproportionate. Not really buying that the flotilla is Hamas, but also loves condoms. That's quite a strange sort of like collection of things together. It's very, very thin, if you ask me. And also the idea that the sort of activists on the flotilla are just kind of selfish people trying to build their own social media profiles. Again, not really very convincing if it's not garnering much attention. I think most influencers are quite attuned to the attention economy. You probably go and do something else if you want to really garner social media, a bigger social media profile for you. So very, very bizarre. And it really is the idea that they've been able to do this so far out into these international waters does kind of bring home, I think, the way in which this issue with Israel and a rogue state that is able to act with no restraint will become our problem. We can see that stretching further and further, stretch further out, obviously, into Iran and other parts of the Middle East. Now they're able to do these actions in international waters that are not part of their territory. So we can see that this is also a question of our own sovereignty, and it's a question of our own control. Can we also control what happens to us and around us and where we live as well? So these issues, which we might think of as very far away in Gaza or in the Middle East, they're kind of coming home to roost a little bit as well. And I think this is one of those stories. It's a small story. Don't want to overplay what's happened here, but at the same time, it does kind of represent this kind of greater encroaching on perhaps our own sovereignty here as well. It's all linked.
100%. I absolutely agree. People keep telling me, oh, why do you care so much what's happening in the Middle East? I'm like, it has repercussions across the world.
Absolutely.
One singular state being allowed to flaunt every treaty, every single piece of international law over and over and over again. It just sends the message broadly to the international community that if they don't care about it, why should anybody else care about it, right? It's their only standards if everyone can be held to them. With the Scottish parliamentary election a week away, the final leaders' debate was hosted this week by STV. And one comment from Scottish Reform leader Malcolm Offord has been the talk of the town when he was asked this question to the Scottish Greens co-leader Ross Greer.
I went to London 40 years ago with £2,000 in debt and full of ambition. I worked hard and I was successful. Today, I own 6 houses, 5 cars and 6 boats. And in a 40-year business career, I've employed hundreds of thousands of people and paid £45 million in tax. I don't say that to boast. Ask you this question. Mr. Greer, in your Scotland, do you want more people like me or fewer people like me?
Fewer people like you. I'm glad you finally admitted how many homes that you have, Lord Offord. I think it's worth at this point in the debate pointing out that there are 3 times as many holiday homes and empty properties in this country as there are homeless children. You don't need 6 homes. You don't even need 2 homes. Everybody just needs a home to live in. Surely, if we're to tackle the housing crisis, the super rich elite individuals like you should be giving up some of those homes so that people who desperately need a roof over their head actually have somewhere to live.
Yeah, just 6 yachts, 6 boats, 6 homes, just an average number of properties that anyone would want to own there. And it's interesting as well that his claim of being somebody who employs all of these people, he's paid loads in tax. I don't doubt the level of tax that he's paid. This guy was a merchant banker and then a private equity investor. The idea that this guy has created any jobs for anybody rather than just being somebody who skims off the top of other people's work, I don't buy it, Mr. Offord. I don't buy that you're somehow such a generous and benevolent man to provide all of this gainful employment when, again, as a private equity investor, you've taken other people's hard work and then you've skimmed off the top. You've been the one extracting surplus value from them rather than providing them with anything. Now, the rogues gallery of right-wing commentators have decided in unison to jump to Offord's defence. First of all, we have this from Tom Harwood of GB News. I will never understand this sneering resentment towards people who have made something of themselves. It's not the Britain I've known. It's not the country I want to live in. If your attitude is to sneer at, rather than celebrate success, you're living a miserable little life. Then we've got this from investor Luke Johnson. Left-wing politicians hate success more than they want citizens to be prosperous. They would rather everyone was equally poor than everyone was better off and some were rich. And lastly, we have this from Benedict Spence, yes, that is a real name, really telling how the National edited the clip to try and hide the poverty Lord offered escape and the work he put in to escape it. The National and the Scottish Greens think poverty is noble and desirable. Now, I don't know what out of anything that was said there by Ross Greer gave people the impression that left-wing ideology is a poverty cult. The idea that the issue with rich people is that they are somehow doing bad things just by existing. I'm like, well, no, there are a certain number of houses that we have at the moment. There's a certain amount of space to build new ones. During a housing crisis, I don't know, seems to me like it's a little bit of a gauche move to me to try and brag about the property portfolio you have when most people don't have any houses at all. Most people only even have one house if they don't have 0 houses. This is it's not exactly a good move during a housing crisis in my book. And the idea that somehow this is about punishing success, or indeed that the only measure of success can be found in monetary or financial terms rather than what people bring to the community, what people bring to society, the positive social utility they generate. Would you call a nurse unsuccessful because they don't own 6 boats, despite the fact that they've spent their life serving their own community? Would you say the same of a teacher or a builder or somebody who actually contributes positively for society rather than someone who extracts and then uses that to hoard property and hoard boats like some kind of mythical dragon? I don't think so. I don't think that that is somehow wanting to punish success or wanting everybody to be poor. In reality, whilst I do believe that you can engage in innovation to be able to maximize the efficiency of society, innovative inventions, things that broadly increase productivity should be rewarded. And the investment to make sure that those things happen should also be rewarded too. But the idea that somehow a society is functional where one person can own so much whilst so many people own so little is a problem of distribution. You can't move away from that. Now, Scottish paper The National also approached Offord himself to comment.
I just wanted to ask you if you understood the backlash to your comments from the debate the other night. You came across as a bit boastful and brash.
So I haven't had any backlash. That's new to me. I haven't heard that. All I've heard from people is, well done for raising this issue. The question that I'm challenging Scotland with is, what sort of Scotland do you want to be in? Do you want to be in a Scotland where people make money or not? Simple as that. You've got a choice. You want reform, or do you want the Greens? It's a simple question, because if the SNP and the Greens get back into power, it's going to be everything's for free and your taxes go up and the country's going to go broke. So make a decision.
Not to be outdone, the Scottish Greens have responded with this. They've called for what they've cheekily described as an Offord tax, an extension of the SNP's existing tax on those who own multiple properties, that is, the additional dwelling supplement tax on second homes. And they want to increase the rate that people pay on those additional homes as they add more to their portfolio. Banseka, when it comes to what Malcolm Offord was talking about there, when it comes to the idea of success being defined in monetary terms, what he said there was we want Scotland to be able to be involved with people who make money or people who don't. Is that the only way of looking in terms of how prosperous a society is, in terms of whether people can make money or have the opportunity to do so? Or there are maybe other constraints we could be looking at?
It's more evidence really of how reform are just, really represent the everyday concerns of all of us who all own 6 houses and 6 boats. I own 7. I mean, it's incredible, I have to say. It is. I don't know why. That's a very, very, very long-standing right-wing argument. There's a very famous debate, I think, from Margaret Thatcher in the 80s when she used to talk about how, socialists want, that they want everyone just to be poor down here, and that you can only move the kind of dial up and down in terms of how people can actually earn enough money, and it's either everyone's poor or everyone makes a little bit of money and then is rich. I don't understand why they're construing things in that manner. We live in a world of abundance. Doesn't always feel like it, of course, and there's lots of ways in which, particularly as the economy gets harder, it's not going to feel like that, and the devil inside us maybe wants us to think in scarcity terms. It's natural, but we do live in a world of abundance where there is more than enough for everybody. But once we start having an economy where, of course, we get a group of people at the top who get most of everything, the vast majority of everything, those people are going to do everything they can to keep it. That's natural human instinct, perhaps, as well. And so if we have a society in which we have people who own so many homes whilst so many people have none, for example. I can't remember if it was mentioned in that clip, but, there are 3 times as many holiday homes and empty properties in this country as there are homeless children. That is in Scotland. Yeah, it's an astonishing statistic, I think. There's something to me about that is actually morally wrong. It's morally wrong that you've got 6 homes. You can't be in all of them at once. Unless you've got a family of 6 and you're all in one house, or one of you in each house. But you can't be using them pretty much all at once, right? So there's something morally decaying. I think there's a moral decay or a moral rot if we have a society where that kind of is taking place. And so I just think the morality of this is completely skewed.
Well, exactly. It's not a positive social utility to have this level of inequality. And if people have read things like the spirit level, we understand that actually society works worse with this level of inequality. In fact, the time when we've seen the highest aggregate growth in this country was during the post-war consensus, where things were much more equal. In the Thatcher period to now, the aggregate level of growth, much lower. We've become less prosperous, despite the fact that we were sold this dream that deregulation and free markets would make us even more prosperous. And the reality, it's made some people very prosperous. Most people, it's not been the case. Now, it's not just north of the border where we're finding out about the wealth of Reform UK's politicians. The Guardian revealed on Wednesday that Reform UK leader Nigel Farage had personally been given an undisclosed £5 million gift by a billionaire before becoming an MP. This is the same cryptocurrency billionaire that had dropped the largest single donation to the UK party in history in 2025 with a £9 million donation to Reform. This places further scrutiny on both Farage and the party, and Reform MP Suella Braverman was quizzed about these revelations by Sky News' Sophie Ridge.
Can I ask you next about Nigel Farage? Because it's emerged that he received a £5 million donation just before he was elected. Now, the parliamentary rules say that new MPs have to register all their financial interests and registrable benefits received in the 12 months before being elected. He didn't declare it. Has he broken the rules?
No, Nigel Farage received a personal gift for his private purposes. MPs, he received it before he was an MP, before he was a candidate, before he was even thinking about becoming a candidate. Now, it's right that elected MPs should declare donations which are made for the purposes of their job, but that doesn't apply to this situation with Nigel Farage.
So you say it was a personal donation for private purposes. I mean, how many times has one of your friends given you £5 million? I mean, it's not like shouting a few rounds at the pub, is it?
Well, the private purposes were very serious purposes, namely his security. For several years preceding his election as an MP, Nigel Farage has carried a high personal risk. He's one of the most highly recognised politicians in the country. Even before he entered the British Parliament, back in 2019, he was attacked. Someone threw a milkshake at him, and that could have turned out very badly had it been something else that person
just to come in, because I absolutely agree with you
a lot of
Nigel Farage,
and he is entitled to pay. Unfortunately, the state will not protect him. They will not issue him with security. He has been forced to fund his own personal security even before he was an MP.
No, it doesn't seem like an unreasonable argument. Again, he has been somebody who has been subject to attacks before, but the rules around when you declare donations is it has to be done if it's been within 12 months of when you become an MP, not as you're a sitting MP. And whilst, of course, plenty of people can receive personal donations, they don't necessarily have to be reported. The rules also say that if there's any amount of ambiguity, you should just declare it anyway. And given this was somebody who then also made a political donation, seems difficult to me to justify it purely in terms of it being personal rather than political. And on the subject of the claims with regards to security, Sophie Ridge made an excellent point in response.
So just to say, I absolutely appreciate the personal risk that Nigel Farage is under. And I would say that I think there is a very strong case that he does need security, right? But the point here is about effectively being in hock for somebody. And if you really, really need the money for something, perhaps legitimately, that doesn't mean that there isn't a conflict of interest. In fact, it increases the conflict of interest because it means that someone is giving you something that you really need. The issue here isn't about whether it's appropriate for Nigel Farage to have security, which I think many would agree with. The issue is that he got a £5 million from somebody and did not declare it. That's the issue.
No, but you're blurring the lines and you're missing the point with respect. He needed security before he was an MP for his personal...
Yeah, I know, I'm aware. I'm absolutely aware of the argument
not
for
related
Nigel Farage
to
needing
his
security.
role
I'm
as an
saying
MP.
that... But if you receive £5 million from somebody for something that you very much need, just before becoming an MP, when the rules said that you are supposed to declare registrable benefits in the 12 months before, you can understand the issue here, right?
I'm sorry, Sophie, but are you suggesting that Nigel Farage should be going around without security? Are you suggesting he should be killed? He should be exposed?
I'm not. I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying that there is an argument, a very clear argument, that he needs security. I'm not diminishing that at all. I think you're correct in saying that. What I'm saying is that if you get £5 million for somebody, you should declare it.
Now, it's worth teasing out exactly what the conflict of interest is. A large amount of Harborne's wealth is tied up in a cryptocurrency called Tether, a so-called stable coin that is pegged to the US dollar to allow crypto investors to be able to swap their holdings in and out of more volatile assets more easily. Here's Nigel Farage himself talking about Tether on LBC last year, for reasons that we here at Novara Media couldn't possibly speculate on.
Tether is about to be valued as a $500 billion company. You know, stable coins, crypto, this world is enormous. And I've been urging for years that London should embrace it. We should become a global trading centre for this stuff under proper regulation. And the governor of the Bank of England earlier this week indicated that no individual should be allowed to have more than £10,000 worth of stable coins, to which some of my friends have said, should we just emigrate? Why is the bank so out of touch? Why is it behaving like a dinosaur? Why not get with the 21st century? These new technologies aren't going away.
As that was in September last year, that was after he'd received the £5 million personal gift, but before there'd been the announcement that he'd had this £9 million donation to Reform UK, both from this same guy who has huge investments in this specific cryptocurrency that Nigel Farage is promoting there, apropos of nothing, on LBC. This is a real problem, and it speaks to me to at least allude to some kind of conflict of interest here, because cryptocurrency as a thing relies on hype-based marketing. It relies on the overall holdings to increase over time, as it's obviously deflationary. Now, Tether is a bit different, as it's actually pegged to the value of the US dollar, but it does mean that if you want to turn your cryptocurrency value, which is essentially meaningless because it's, an investment vehicle in itself, based upon trying to be able to sell these things on to other people, it relies on liquidity being put into the market from new buyers to be able to pull back real dollars yourself, to be able to turn that into actual commodities on the open market. The other thing there that's important in terms of how this might affect how people would legislate if they ever got into office, when Nigel Farage mentioned Andrew Bailey there saying there should be a limit on the amount of Tether or stablecoins in general people can hold, this is specifically because there is an issue when it comes to monetary policy and how central banks work, insofar as if you want to have monetary sovereignty in Europe, in Africa, or in Asia, wherever it is, and more of your currency is being converted into stablecoins, which are pegged to the US dollar in lots and lots of cases, as Tether is, that means that loads of what's happening internally in that economy is being controlled by interest rate decisions, it's being controlled by monetary policy in the United States and not in the country that it's in, So more and more pounds get spent on stablecoins, the more power goes away from the UK central bank, and sovereignty is transferred essentially over to the central bank in the United States, which again, of course, given how much Farage is very happy for the US to control our foreign policy, our economic policy, our social policy, that would also, in terms of monetary policy, that sovereignty would move that way as well. Banseka, conflict of interest here? Potentially? Do you think so?
I think so. I mean, you picked up on something which I think is a very obvious contradiction, which makes Nigel Farage this kind of eternally curious person, which is the way in which he has been the poster child for bring back sovereignty, control of our borders. But at the same time, he also operates within these kind of higher elite circles, these financial circles, benefits from them. Very much the opposite of kind of what he tends to say. He talked in that clip about Britain becoming a global trading nation. Interesting. What he means by that is I want open borders, but I want open borders for capital. I want open borders for money and really capital for a very narrow amount of people, ultimately, not for the benefit of most of us. Completely counter, of course, to ideas about free movement of people, particularly people from particular countries that perhaps Nigel Farage does not deem culturally synonymous perhaps with ours. So there's this real internal contradiction. And that's a kind of neoliberal contradiction. I think he's not the only person to have ever had it. Enoch Powell had that contradiction. Hayek had that contradiction. They could never explain why it was free movement for everything except people. So Nigel Farage kind of represents that, doesn't he?
Well, he just believe in free movement for rich people.
Yeah.
Not only
they can go wherever they want.
Not just capital moving across borders, but people moving, and
Absolutely.
also not just for cultural reasons, but he actively is kind of looking at the kind of people who would move for tax reasons as well. He's had comments from Jim Ratcliffe, who saw as a tax exile in Monaco. Those people seem to be pretty hand in glove ideologically. So it is, again, free movement for some, but not for others.
Yeah, it's this very kind of curious contradiction. I mean, on the issue about his personal security, I can believe that he requires, a certain amount of security. He's a very well-known MP now, possibly one of the best-known MPs at the moment. I think he's got the highest number of TikTok followers. He's quite well-known, I think, and certainly in the national press particularly as well. So I can believe, of course, that he's facing threats. And I think we do live in an environment now where perhaps members of parliament do face more threats than maybe they did 15, 20 years ago.
Oh, certainly,
I think there has, we started this program talking about the increased violence against certain demographics of people, but I also think there is some of that violence now against members of the state and representatives of the state as well.
We covered literally had plans that were inspired by the man who murdered Joe Cox, right?
Absolutely. So the security issue, I've got no problem with that. I understand that he needs a certain amount of security. Not here to debate that. Just declare it. Just follow the rules and declare it. I mean, the kind of protestations that Suella Braverman, who'd obviously been sent out to bat for Nigel Farage in the media, I mean, they were just totally ridiculous. And then she really ratcheted it up there, going straight for the jugular and being like, well, essentially
you want him killed. You want him killed.
You want him to die. And I could see that Sophie Ridge was clearly taken aback by that and then kind of deferred a bit more, which is really quite scary, to see that kind of weaponization as a way of preventing journalists from asking very serious, entirely sensible questions about a politician's finances. The reality is he hasn't followed the rules. I thought initially when I looked at the story, there'd been a bit of a loophole that they'd found. It's not even that. He just hasn't followed the rules. He should have declared it and he didn't. And that's probably what they should just say.
He's been referred to the standards watchdog, I believe, who will make a decision on whether he actually followed the rules, whether it can be counted as a mistake if he hasn't. I don't know how that will end up turning out. But at the very least, right, we know that there's a conflict of interest. It's obvious there's a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
If he wasn't declaring it, then that looks like some more sort of a problem to me.
Yeah, and frankly, even when they do declare it, I'm always like, so what? Because they declare it in this massive list of massive conflicts that they've got and then nothing happens anyway. Well, that's a whole other thing.
That's the worst part, is that we've essentially taken, when it comes to conflict of interest, that all you do is declare it and then we forget about it.
Just write it down.
And I'm like, no, our politicians should not have conflicts of interest. We should have a parliament. The mother of all parliaments should be entirely clean of these outside influences, but we see continual times over and over again, especially now we're seeing with Reform UK, all of these influences coming in, like Nigel Farage apparently has got involved with what Kwasi Kwarteng's doing with Bitcoin now. They're all involved in this cryptocurrency world, and this needs heavy regulation. And there is a political incentive now for Nigel Farage not to want to regulate it, regardless of the negative externalities for the broader macroeconomy for other people who aren't involved in these kind of things, such as cryptocurrency. Now, given Reform politicians appear to be somewhat awash with, let's say, dubiously gotten gains, it's not surprising to find that the shy Tories of old have become the shy reformers of today. Novara's own Harriet Williamson found this out herself when she visited the soon-to-be former Labour stronghold of Barnsley, where Reform are predicted to make huge gains in the local elections next week. Yet the voters themselves were suspicious by their absence. You can watch her full report by clicking the link in the description down below. Well, fam, thank you very much, Banseka, for joining me tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure to have us together on the stage for the first time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I had a blast.
It's been an absolute blast. I absolutely have to agree. As always, thank you everyone for tuning in at home as well. Come back tomorrow for another show from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.